Good morning. Was there an intelligence failure in Ladakh? This is the question that I intend tackling today. According to the banner report in the Hindu newspaper of 13th July, the chairman of the Central Military Commission, Xi Jinping, he in January 2020 signed a mobilization and training order under which the PLA was ordered to do aggressive training, as a consequence of which Ladakh happened. There is a clear insinuation in this report that the Leh Corps commander and the army chief should be held responsible for the intelligence failure. This report is rubbish. Why I say that is that anybody, and especially the Indian Army and the army chiefs, starting 2015, 2016, especially 2017, 18 and 19, if they had focused less on the Western Front against Pakistan and they had seen very carefully the PLA training trajectory, they would have realized that the PLA is preparing itself very well for war. They would have realized that the China will strike at a time and place of its choosing, which it chose to be May. In fact, in the book Dragon on Our Doorstep, which came out in early 2016, I gave out a clear scenario, a chapter, which was threat to Ladakh, and exactly what I wrote there seems to have happened on the ground in Ladakh. So how was this possible? So let me start from 2015. As we know, in 2015, the PLA did massive reforms. As part of the reforms, they created theatre commands. They created the Western Theatre Command against India, which had four peculiarities. This is their largest theatre command. It has a defined enemy, India. Here the warfare will be in high altitude, which is a unique warfare, nothing like doing in the deserts, plains or any other terrain. And in December 2010, China had made it very clear it does not have a border with India in Ladakh. Now this thing gets shown into the organizational structure of the Western Theatre Command, where the command headquarters is in Chengdu. Then it has a Tibet Military Command, which is a elevated status command headed by a lieutenant general, which looks after the eastern sector, which is Arunachal Pradesh and Sikkim. And insofar as Xinjiang is concerned, which faces Ladakh, they have a lower status command, which is headed by a major general, and it is called Xinjiang Provincial Command. And I wrote in the book Dragon, the reason for that seems to be that this Xinjiang command does not have combat troops. It will get the combat troops from the Western Theatre Command. What it has are the border guards. Now border guards are PLA. What they don't have is the combat capability. They are the first line of defense. Because in this area, Xinjiang area, our northern Ladakh area, this is where since 2011 interoperability is going on between the PLA and the Pakistan military, specifically their Air Force and their army. So this becomes our major vulnerability. This I wrote in the book. So this is what happened in 2015. Now in 2016, Xi Jinping donned another hat and he became the commander-in-chief. Now this was not symbolic. The idea was that in the Tri-Service Joint Staff Department, they created a Joint Operations Command Center for the Commander-in-Chief, and this is where at that time the instructions were given to write the training regulations. As a consequence of which, next year in 2017, 5 things happened which got completely overlooked or ignored by the Indian Army leadership at that time, including the Army Chief then. Now, the first thing that happened was, having got the instructions from Xi, the PLA came out with a unique document called Military Training Regulation and New Outline of Military Training. What was interesting about this was it said the training will happen in three verticals. The first vertical was the realistic combat training, then the virtual reality training, and the augmented reality training. And they would make use of simulation, war games, and training by active command. What they did not consider is what is quite common in the Indian Army is the tabletop exercises, where basically the fellows just get around a table and they discuss a operation scenario. What is missing in the tabletop exercises and what is critical for training is information or data. So that is what the PLA was looking for. Realistic data. Now, next what they did was they allocated a training budget. Now, let's see the training budget. Their training budget in 2017, which has continued every year, is 1/3 of their total annual allocation. Now, let's get a sense of this. In 2017, their disclosed budget, annual budget, was $220 billion. So, 1/3 of this, which is nearly $70 billion, was allocated only for realistic combat training. Now, this far exceeds the total budget of the Indian military, which stands at about 49 or 50 billion dollars, and no professional military in the world allocates so much of budget for training only. So this is the importance they were giving to training. Now, what they needed was they needed the red forces and the blue forces. You see, unlike India, where the own forces in a war game or exercise, they are called the blue forces and the enemy is the red force. It is the opposite in the PLA. PLA, the own forces are the red forces and the enemy is the blue force. So now, having created the Western Theatre Command, the entire structure in place, they needed to get the red force there and in large numbers. What did they do? They did Doklam. Doklam happened in 2017, where India declared a tactical victory. Nobody in India considered this, that why is it that the PLA would start a crisis at a place, at a tactical place, where it could not win. It was severely disadvantaged because all the heights were being held by the Indian Army. So you see, the whole idea was, and this was their major aim according to me, was to create a situation where without raising the hackles, they could get large number of forces permanently in the Tibet Autonomous Region, and which they got. Starting 2017 winter, they created a habitat, they created an ecosystem for something like 200,000 Red Force, which now has a permanent abode there, which does regular training there, realistic training as the PLA calls, including live firings. They do that there. So they did all that. Next, what did they do? Next, what they did was that all this information or the feedback, the lessons learned of this training, the data, they created 5 centers. This all happened in 2017. Now, in those 5 centers, one of the center was the National Defense University Joint Operational Center, was designated as a nodal agency for the virtual reality training and the augmented reality training. They did all that. Now, after that, these were the 5 things they did in 2017. Now, on the 3rd of January 2018, she became the first PLA leader, or rather the first Chinese leader after Mao, to directly address the combat forces. This, of course, got worldwide coverage also. But what did not get the coverage was that instructions were passed in 2018 that all this training that we are talking about and the money that is being spent, it should what all is desired should be put every year into a document to be called the mobilization and training order. So you see, that is how in February 2019 the first mobilization and training order came, and that is how in 2020 they came up with the second training order, and the next year 2021 they will have another training order. You see, the point here is this all has been missed the background, because it's an inspired report to me, where willy-nilly the journalists they've been used by the establishment, basically looking for scapegoats for the intelligence failure. You see, this all has a background. This is what needs to be understood. Okay, next what happened was, now they created the fund, they started, the Red Forces started doing the training, they had the center, they had everything going. Now they wanted data or information on the enemy, the Blue Force. So this data now they will get as a consequence of the Ladakh crisis. Unlike Doklam, where their main aim was how to get the PLA in the theatre, here it's a spin-off. So as a spin-off, what has happened is that a lot of Indian Army has been inducted into the theatre. Despite the disengagement and the de-escalation, it is a certainty now that large numbers will have to take a permanent abode there. There will be a requirement to build a habitat, there will be a requirement to build an ecosystem for those forces, for the simple reason that the threat has gone up. The threat from the PLA now is forces in being. They are right there. So, what has the PLA done? There is a very good report by one of our satellite imagery experts, Colonel Vinayak Bhatt, who has written, and the report got underplayed, who wrote that they have created, the PLA has created a chain of radars. Like, you know, it's there in the coastal belt. They have done it in the mountains, especially in the Ladakh sector. And he gave out 3 specific references also, that they've got the land radars at Depsang, they've got it in Pangeng So, and they've got it in Demchok. Which, with, for example, he says that in Depsang they can see right across Siachen as well. Now, add to this their capability of Bedu. As we all know, in 2020, this year, they have finished their 35th satellite launch and their global network is ready. And they have, according to the reports, very good military resolution. And the only foreign country with which they are sharing the military resolution is Pakistan. So they have the Bedu, they have the land radar chain in Ladakh, and of course we all know they have a plethora of drones, and they have electro-optic systems, they have everything. So insofar as ISR is concerned, they can get it very well. Now what are they looking for? They are looking for 6 things now. Once the Indian Army is deployed here permanently, which in any case they will be in large numbers, the first thing that they would be monitoring about the enemy or the Blue Forces, how the high altitude, what does high altitude mean for them? Because it's a different warfare. Then they'll be looking at the deployment patterns in this terrain in high altitude of the Indian Army and the Air Force patterns. They will be looking at the command and control centers. They will be looking at, for example, when the training happens, the tactical headquarters, where it goes. I mean, this is all important information, data. They'll be looking at the operational logistics. How is the food, fuel, everything supplied, and where does it come from? They'll be looking at all this. They'll be looking at the habitat. How good is the habitat? Because the good habitat will determine the morale of the forces and the ecosystem. So, and they will also be looking at what sort of firings they do and how do they do the calibration of weapons for the high altitude. So you see a whole lot of information they will get on the Blue Force, and that is so they are prepared for that. Now, why I'm saying all that is that when you join up these 3 things, you join up the interoperability, you join up the excellent ISR capabilities that they have created, and with Pakistan military being a privy or being a partner for their military resolutions, and it becomes very clear that they are looking at something in the future very specific. So what could they be looking at? This brings me to the present. When I talk of the present, I am not going into the details. I have done it in my earlier videos. The only thing I would like to say is that despite the disengagement and the de-escalation, which will be a slow process, Indian Army has decided to take a non-confrontationist attitude towards the PLA, a subdued attitude, because we had 2 days back the DG of paramilitary force, ITBP and BSF. He is DG for both, Director General, Mr. S.S. Deswal. He spoke to the media and he made 3 points. He says all our land is with us, our borders are safe, and morale of the troops of the army and the border guarding forces is high. So this was basically, he was the official spokesperson. The reality we know is different. The reality in Ladakh is the PLA has rubbished the 1993 line of actual control, and then 1959 claim line now is the line of actual control, and around this now the new peace protocols will be worked, that is after the disengagement happens. So once, and what was the reason for doing this here? The reason was that they are being very specific, the PLA in Galwan, where they want to control the heights, and in Dapsang they have done deep intrusions. Dapsang is north Ladakh, next to the Karakoram Pass, because they want to be in complete control of this very important road which has been built by the Indian Army, and this is that Darbuk Shiok Daulat Beg Oldie road, which will get completed next year, I think by October. And this is that road which, in case of a crisis, will help the Indian Army speed up, mobilize and speed up their forces to subsector north, which is our vulnerability, and this is what they will dominate, the PLA will dominate. Now, again I say, put everything together. Put their domination of that road, a capability to cut off the additional forces going to subsector north, then look at the interoperability in that area, which is subsector north and Siachen, and then what I said about the Xinjiang Provincial Command having a lower status and likelihood of Pakistan taking the lead. We are now looking at a possibility of a one front war, a reinforced one front, where there is a likelihood of Pakistan military taking the lead and the PLA providing humongous invisible capabilities to the Pakistan military. So you see, this concept of two front war is gone, it's out of the window. So that is what we are looking at today. And why I say we are looking at today is that whereas the Indian government has decided that militarily we'll have a non-confrontationist attitude, politically what we are seeing is a confrontationist attitude of the Modi government towards China. I mean, the present indicators are like that. Now, if this continues, you see, if you have a confrontationist attitude without a muscle to back it, then in my assessment, in a year's time, we should be prepared for some major crisis happening in our vulnerability, which will involve subsector north, it will involve Siachen, and it will involve Kashmir. This unfortunately is what I foresee, and if this happens, which I hope does not happen, and if it happens, so please don't call it an intelligence failure then. Thank you so much. I want to make an appeal, as I always do. If you like this video, please subscribe. It's a free subscription, just helps me to reach out to more people. Thank you very much.